The war had ended, not with parades or declarations, but with silence and smoke drifting across the red plains of Zalthun. For Captain Elias Rourke, it was just another battlefield scorched and buried under treaties. The Thalvara Dominion, after years of brutal conflict, had finally bent the knee fractured but not broken. In the aftermath, peace was forced into existence like a malformed child, born of compromise and mutual exhaustion. Rourke, decorated and wearied, stood among the few human officers chosen to oversee the post-war stabilization. The Thalvara insisted on ancient rites, rituals of victory and submission that made no sense to the Earthborn. To refuse would be to disgrace the newly brokered peace. So the humans nodded, smiled, and endured it. When the so-called gift was presented, it happened with alien fanfare. Procession lines, bowed heads, and lacquered boxes filled with exotic relics. But the moment Rourke saw the living being presented to him, everything else became meaningless. She stood silently in chains. A woman, clearly Thalvara, with violet skin, silver-lined eyes, and ceremonial bindings that marked her as a possession. She said nothing. She didn't even flinch as a bio-collar around her neck locked into place, then synced with a biometric scanner linked to Rourke's DNA. The alien diplomat offered a slight bow. Your reward, Captain Rourke, a personal bondservant of highest breeding. Rourke didn't speak, not immediately. His gut clenched, rage rising in his throat, but the weight of the moment pinned him in place. The other human officers looked uncomfortable. Some looked away. None stepped forward. He knew the political implications. Rejecting her publicly would embarrass the Zalthun delegation and potentially sabotage fragile talks. Their society was rooted in layers of dominance, honor debts, and submission. She wasn't just a woman. They considered her a symbol, a peace offering crafted in flesh. He accepted, not because he wanted to, but because someone had to do it without starting another war. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Her body stiffened. Later, alone in his quarters, she stood near the wall, unmoving, expression blank. Rourke tried speaking. You're not a slave. Not to me. No response. He tried again. Do you have a name? Nothing. She slept on the floor. Refused the cot. Ate only when food was placed on the ground. She never made eye contact, never asked for anything. She seemed trained to expect pain or orders, or worse. He learned her name from a biometric chip in the collar. Kiritao, 27 solar cycles, noble caste, now reclassified as servant class through political disfavor. Her ownership had transferred legally under Zalthun law, and due to treaty clauses, Earth couldn't override it immediately. Rourke filed 3 separate requests for intervention with human command. All came back the same: delicate situation, maintain protocol, avoid escalation. He stopped wearing his medals. They felt tainted. Each day he tried small things, leaving out food on the table instead of the floor, giving her access to his quarters comm terminal, not connected to the main network, but enough to run old Earth media. She never touched it. One night, after another failed attempt at conversation, he projected a video. Children playing in a field, an old Earth documentary about human development. He didn't expect her to react, but she turned her head just slightly when a mother hugged her son. Her eyes moved, just for a second. He said gently, "That's what family looks like." Still, she said nothing. Weeks passed. Every alien dignitary he met praised him for disciplining his property well. Some offered trade in case he grew bored. One even joked about the spirit-breaking phase. Rourke nearly struck him, held back only by the threat of court-martial. He began studying the bio-collar. Human tech advisors warned him. It was fused into her nervous system, laced through her spinal cord, impossible to remove without risking paralysis or death. "You want her free?" the chief engineer asked. "Then you better get creative. Or patient." He hated himself for every second it stayed on her. Late one evening, he returned to find her standing instead of kneeling. A subtle shift. Her posture still guarded, but less resigned. She looked at the food left on the table. He watched from the doorway as she slowly reached for it. No trembling, no hesitation. She took a bite. He stepped inside. She froze. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I know," she replied, voice barely audible. It was the first time she had spoken. He stopped, sat down slowly. Why didn't you say anything before? You are my owner. I'm not. Then why does the collar obey you? Rourke didn't answer. She sat down across from him, not on the floor, on a chair. After a long silence, she asked, Is this normal? For humans? What part? You feed your captives. Speak to them as equals. We don't keep captives. She didn't respond, but her expression, once vacant, now held a flicker of something different. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity. He leaned forward. Do you want to be free? She looked down at the collar, touched it softly. I don't know what freedom feels like. I'll help you find out. She said nothing else that night, but she finished the meal. She didn't sleep on the floor. The next morning, she stood beside the window, watching the sunrise over the scorched horizon. Rourke sipped his coffee and didn't interrupt her. Eventually, she spoke again. What happens to people like me if the war returns? Rourke answered quietly. I won't let it. For the first time, she looked him in the eyes. He didn't smile, but she didn't look away. Kiritao did not speak again for 3 days. But something fundamental had shifted. She no longer flinched at footsteps. She no longer stared at the floor when he entered, and once, when he returned late. She was sitting in his chair, reading the subtitles of another Earth documentary, eyes quietly tracing lines of text. Rourke didn't disturb her. He just sat on the floor and listened to the faint hum of silence that no longer felt empty. Every small gesture was a message. When she placed her used cup in the sink, instead of leaving it untouched. When she adjusted the blanket on the spare cot, instead of refusing it. None of it was accidental. She was testing something, maybe him, maybe herself. He asked her simple questions. Sometimes she answered with nods or short words. Mostly she listened. She watched him closely, as if trying to understand a language that wasn't made of words. One morning, he found her tracing the outline of an old Earth map displayed on the wall. Her fingers hovered over places, Africa, Europe, East Asia, as if searching for secrets buried under names she didn't recognize. What is this? She asked. Home, he replied. Are your people united? He exhaled. It took a long time, a lot of pain. But yes, mostly. She looked at him. That's why you don't need servants. We learn better ways. She tilted her head. That would be forbidden where I come from. I know. Word of their strange arrangement began to spread among the alien staff. Whispers carried in corridors. A human who let a slave eat at his table, who gave her access to literature, who hadn't claimed his rights. Some laughed. Others were disturbed. The Thalvar general, old, scarred, draped in gold-trimmed armor, confronted Rourke in the mess hall. You disgraced the gift. Rourke didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, just replied, She's not a gift. She's a person. The general growled. You insult our customs. Your restraint implies she is worth beyond her status. She does. The general leaned close. If you won't command her, someone else will. Later, Rourke installed a biometric lock on his quarters, just in case. Back inside, he didn't hide anything from Kiritao. He showed her the messages, the warnings. She listened impassive. When he finished, she simply said, They think you are weak. I'm not. I know. He brought in old stories from Earth, films, archives, novels translated to universal standard. He picked carefully. Tales of revolution, hope, redemption. She absorbed them silently. Then one night, she asked, Do you believe those stories? He looked up. Which part? That people change. I do. Her gaze lingered. Your people fight differently. How so? You win, but you don't destroy. You kill, but you mourn. You conquer, and then offer peace. He thought for a long moment. We learn that the cost of cruelty is too high. Eventually, it comes back. My people don't believe that. You will. That night, she stood near the holographic window projection. Rain fell across a simulated city skyline. She watched it with an intensity that made him uneasy. Do your people make things just because they're beautiful? She asked. He nodded. All the time. We build only what serves. There's more to life than function. She hesitated, then asked, What is chocolate? He blinked, caught off guard. A dessert, sweet, from Earth. I saw in one of your films. Children fight for it. He chuckled. Yeah, it's that good. The next day, he used a special favor to order some from a human supply cache. When the small ration pack arrived, she examined it with cautious curiosity. She broke off a piece, tasted it, and began to cry. Not soft tears, but silent, violent sobs that racked her shoulders. She covered her mouth, turned away. He didn't move, just waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was cracked. Why make something just to feel joy? Because that's what makes us human. She sat down across from him, clutching the half-melted square in trembling hands. I don't know who I am without orders. Without fear. You don't have to know yet. I was noble. My family had power. Then we lost favor. My father was executed. I was offered to a general, then sold. This is the third time I've worn a collar. You deserve better. No one ever told me that. I'm telling you now. She didn't cry again that night. She just sat, silent and still, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. In the following days, she spoke more freely, still reserved, still careful, but no longer blank. She asked about human history, about Earth's wars, our own shameful past, our abolition movements, civil rights. When he showed her photos of protests and revolutions, she studied them like ancient texts. You fought each other for justice? She asked. Sometimes, yeah, it was messy, but we learned. Her voice was quiet. We silence those who protest. We erase the past. You can build a future anyway. That night, he left the terminal unlocked. In the morning, she had written a message. I want to understand. The following weeks were a delicate dance of small victories. Every day, Kiritao made a choice to be more human, to break the chains of her past conditioning. But it wasn't easy. Her steps were careful, hesitant. But with each passing moment, Rourke saw less of the slave she had been and more the person she was becoming. They spent their days talking about everything and nothing. History, art, culture. Rourke was amazed at how quickly she adapted to the vastness of human concepts, the nuance in our world. She absorbed knowledge the way a dry sponge soaks up water, only stopping when the weight of it all became too much. She began to explore his quarters, no longer confined to a corner or the floor. The walls that once seemed so imposing had faded. She ran her fingers across the bookshelves, touching the spines as if each one held a secret of a distant world. How you choose which book to read? She asked once, picking up a tattered copy of a classic Earth novel. Sometimes it's just a feeling, Rourke said, watching her closely. She turned the book over in her hands. You choose based on nothing. Not nothing. It's the stories that speak to me. You would let a story choose you? He smiled. That's how we live. We let the world shape us. She frowned. We choose only what keeps us safe. That's not living, he said softly. At night, when they were alone, Kiritao would ask him questions that pierced deeper than anything before. Questions that no slave would dare ask of her master. She wanted to know about humanity's flaws, but also its potential, the way we could rise from our darkest days to create something better. Rourke had started to see the cracks in the armor of her conditioning. The years of suffering, the years of subjugation, had worn her down to the point where she couldn't see a life outside the chains. But the glimmer of freedom was there, hidden beneath her scars, and he was determined to bring it out. She had started to ask him about freedom, what it meant to be free. And every time he told her, she seemed to shrink back, not because she didn't want to understand, but because the concept was so foreign to her that it was terrifying. One evening, he took her to the human base's garden. It wasn't much, just a patch of artificially grown grass and a few trees, but it was enough to show her what Earth could create when it wasn't ravaged by war. It was a small, peaceful place, and the smell of the earth made her pause. Do your people do this? Grow things for no reason? Rourke nodded. Yes, not everything we do is for war. Sometimes We just want to make something beautiful." She crouched near the flowers. Her fingers brushed over the petals gently, as if afraid they might break. For the first time, she smiled, not a polite smile, not a guarded one, but a genuine smile. It was small, just a flicker, but it was there. "I never thought it was possible," she murmured. "What?" "To grow something just because it's beautiful." Rourke stood beside her, watching her examine the simple beauty of the flowers. "That's one of the things we do best. We create beauty in the world because we're more than just survival. Humans," she said slowly, "are strange. We are, but it's what makes us human." She turned to face him. Her eyes were softer now, less guarded. "I want to believe that, but every time I think I understand, it slips away. I know, it's not easy, but you'll get there." And in that moment, Rourke realized something. He had thought of Kirital as someone broken, someone who needed saving. But the truth was, she wasn't any different from the rest of humanity. We all started somewhere, scarred, imperfect, uncertain. But with the right push, we could choose a different path. She wasn't just a slave in need of freedom. She was a person, capable of making her own choices. The next day, she asked for a book on human history. Not military history, not the battles humanity had fought, but the history of peace, of revolution, of change. She wanted to know about the movements that had fought for freedom, the ideals that had reshaped Earth. Rourke found a book on the subject, something that had always been a personal favorite. He handed it to her carefully. "You might find it interesting. It's about the fight for civil rights." She took the book in her hands like it was a treasure and began to read. As the days passed, their conversations deepened. Rourke told her about the civil rights movements, the abolition of slavery, the long and painful road humanity had walked to evolve beyond its basest instincts. And as she listened, he could see it in her eyes, the spark of something new beginning to form, a possibility she had never considered before. But it wasn't just the books that changed her. It was the small things, the way Rourke treated her, the way he never saw her as a possession, the way he simply saw her as a person. Slowly, she began to change her behavior, too. She started to speak more freely, asking questions without hesitation. She took more interest in human culture, trying to understand it, trying to understand him. She learned to enjoy the small pleasures of life, books, food, music, moments of peace. And slowly, she began to realize something. She wasn't a slave anymore, not in the way she had always understood it. Her collar wasn't a sign of her ownership. It was a shackle that had been placed on her by the universe, but it didn't define her. And that realization, when it finally hit her, was the turning point. One evening, after reading the final chapter of the book on civil rights, she closed it gently and looked at Rourke. "Is it true that you fought for freedom?" "We did," he said. "It wasn't easy, but we fought for it because it's what makes us who we are." She looked down at her collar, then back at him. "Then I want to fight, too, for something that's mine." Rourke didn't say anything. He just nodded, understanding. She wasn't his responsibility anymore. She was her own. It was a week later when the first real test came. The Zalthun general, the one who had mocked Rourke for his restraint, arrived unannounced. He was a looming figure, taller than most humans, with battle scars crisscrossing his face in thick, dark armor that shimmered like obsidian. He had come to inspect the status of the peace accord, to make sure that the human leadership was adhering to the rules. But his true mission was more personal, to remind Rourke of his place. "You're allowing your servant too much freedom," the general said, his voice low, menacing. "She is not your equal. She is a possession." Rourke stood up slowly, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard. "She's not a possession. And if you want to continue insulting her, I suggest you leave." The general's eyes narrowed. "She is an object of our people's generosity. Your people should be grateful." "I'm not interested in your gift," Rourke said, his voice calm but unwavering. "She's a person, and I treat her as such." Kirital entered the room silently, standing beside Rourke. She no longer kept her eyes to the floor. She met the general's gaze without hesitation. The difference between the woman who had arrived in chains and the woman standing before him now was stark. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't broken. She was defiant. "You speak of gratitude," Kiritao said softly, her voice steady. "But gratitude implies that one has a choice. I never had a choice." The general scoffed. "You should be kneeling in gratitude, not speaking to me like this." She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. "I've learned something in the time I've spent here. Gratitude is earned, not demanded." For a moment, the general didn't respond. His brow furrowed, as if the words themselves were foreign to him. But he was a soldier, and soldiers didn't retreat from their pride easily. Rourke stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. "She's not yours to command anymore, and you will not speak to her like that in my presence." There was a long, tense silence. Then the general scoffed again, a bitter sound that echoed in the room. "You humans always trying to change things," he muttered. "You'll find that not everything is as easy as you think." Kiritao took a step closer to Rourke. She stood tall, her posture no longer rigid but confident. She had come to understand that freedom wasn't just a state of being, it was a state of mind. And now, she was determined to claim that freedom, even if it meant facing down the representatives of a culture that had tried to strip her of it. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cold now. "But that doesn't matter anymore. I'm not your slave, and I never will be again." The general's face twisted in rage. "You're nothing without us. You'd still be nothing without the collar." Kiritao didn't flinch. "I wasn't born to wear chains. And neither were you." Rourke glanced at her, surprised at the fierceness in her words. She had never spoken like this before, not with this kind of authority. It was a moment of transformation, one that he'd seen in so many before. The moment when someone stops being a victim and begins to reclaim their life, their dignity. "Leave," Rourke said to the general, his voice calm but cutting. "This is over. There's nothing for you here." The general's fist clenched, his gaze shifting between Rourke and Kiritao. But Rourke didn't move, and Kiritao stood firm beside him. With a final, contemptuous sneer, the general turned and stalked out of the room, leaving them alone. The silence that followed felt different than before. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't filled with tension. It was the silence of a new beginning. Kiritao let out a slow breath. "That felt good," she said, almost to herself. Rourke looked at her, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "You handled yourself well." She glanced up at him, meeting his eyes. "It's because you taught me that I had the right to." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had always believed in freedom, in human dignity, in equality. But hearing those words from Kiritao made him realize that it wasn't just about fighting for others. It was about empowering them to fight for themselves. She was free now, free in every way that mattered. As the days passed, their relationship began to shift. They no longer interacted as master and servant, but as equals. Two people had found a way to rise above the system that had tried to hold them down. They worked together, learning about each other's cultures, sharing their lives in ways that were honest and open. Rourke showed her the things he loved, books, music, art, and she taught him about her own people's history, about the things they valued, about the price of survival in a world where strength was everything. In time, she became a symbol, not just of human compassion, but of her own resilience. She began to speak to the other Thalvar slaves, offering them the same words Rourke had given her. She showed them that there was more to life than obedience. She reminded them that they too had the power to choose, to fight for their own futures. And Rourke, standing beside her, knew that their fight had only just begun. They weren't just fighting for peace anymore. They were fighting for the idea that no one, no matter their history, their past, or their chains, should ever be made to feel like they were anything less than free. It was a fight worth living for.